Introduction's always the hardest, isn't it? It's so difficult just to be able to say, hi guys, it's me, I'm back with another review, but I guess this is what I'm gonna do this time. So just a quick one. I've changed my audio a little bit. So when moving into the studio, I didn't think too much about treating the audio. So I put a bit of a compressor on this just to make sure that there's no reverb. I have noticed a little bit of reverb. The actual capsule inside the lapel here actually picks up quite a bit. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. I have done something on the back end, call it a software change, which I've applied there in OBS. But if you want to know more about that, just let me know in the comment section below. So today we're going to be looking at a monitor sent to me by MSI. It is the MAG272CQR. With the sheer amount of monitors on the market, it's become extremely difficult to make a choice as to what monitor I need to buy. And this is because, in my opinion, manufacturers have thrown around jargon a lot. This little feature, this little specification that's going to make this monitor awesome, this little bit of software, and it's kind of diluting the message and making it very difficult for you to be able to buy a monitor or actually know what to look for. MSI has exploded onto the monitor scene over the last, say, 2-3 years with a big emphasis on quality as well as health of eyes. And we've seen this with a lot of their introductions at CES and all the different shows across the world. But today is about this specific monitor and putting it through its paces to tell you everything about it. So we're going to start off with the design. Overall, I was really impressed with the design of this monitor purely because it is an MAG, which is MSI's most entry level. Now, the entire composition is made of plastic except for the feet, which are metal. It does have that little throughput for cable management, which you can see right underneath the MSI sign. That does make cable management a little bit easier. The curvature, which is a spec but is also part of the design, is 1500R, so it is a nice entry-level curvature rating for people that want to try out curvy monitors for the first time. It uses a joystick over having multi-button. This is just a personal preference. I find it easier to be able to navigate through the monitor. For those who do like RGB, it does have RGB on the back, and you're able to customize this either through MSI Center, Dragon Center, or whichever software you can integrate it with. Personally, I don't see the point in having RGB at the back of a monitor, but for those who actually do want to have it, it is definitely there. The monitor is able to be adjusted, as you can see in front of you, and does have 178 degrees of viewing angle. One cool design feature, which was a first for me, is that it does have this kind of plasticky thing that comes out where you push it, and when it comes out, you're able to hang your headset over it. The bezels are quite nice and thin, which does give you more monitor real estate, but they're not the thinnest I've seen, but again, this is an MAG. Next, we're going to go over the specs, and I'm going to do the specs as per MSI because when we go into performance, we're going to be able to draw a comparison to say this is what MSI says versus this is what it actually does. Panel size firstly is 27 inches or 69 centimeters. The curvature rating of the monitor, as mentioned before, is 1500R. The panel type, importantly, is a VA or vertical alignment. Panel resolution is a 2560 by 1440 or QHD. Aspect ratio of 16:9, which is pretty typical. Brightness is 300 nits. Contrast ratio is 3000:1. The refresh rate is 165 Hertz. The response time is 1 millisecond MPRT. Accuracy is 90% DCI-P3, and I encourage you to make a mental note here, and on sRGB it is 100%. For those that need to know the input-outputs, it has got one display port at 1.2A, it has two HDMIs which are 2.0B, and it does have a USB-C, which is an alternative for display out. USB ports also important. It has two of the USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A's and one USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type B. Last point in the specs, just make sure that you are using the right cable. Yes, it does come with the right cables, but if you do want to get that full 165, make sure that you are using the DP. There is only one feature that I really want to talk about, and that's gaming intelligence, which is basically a really cool way to control your monitor from your desktop. It is just a little bit difficult to set up, and that is not because of user fault, that's because of the actual application launch. So in order to get it to work, you have to plug in your HDMI, your DP, but you also have to plug in the USB that they give you, and that'll basically make sure that the monitor recognizes, there's a little bit of firmware installed on the monitor, I'm plugging into the PC, and then it will auto load. Problem with the auto load is that it failed on me 3 times, and I worked a quick workaround in order to get this working, and I'll show you what I did for those who may struggle with the same thing. Now, when you plug in the USB, you will have an auto run feature. It should automatically pop up a screen like this on the left-hand side where it's the actual loading. But if it doesn't, you'll be able to go into my computer. It almost does appear as a USB drive and you'll see auto run. The problem with it is that once you go through the installation, it fails pretty much every single time at the end, which is not exactly what you're looking for. But there is a workaround to this. Again, stop asking me to install Norton. Now, the workaround that I found is that if you go to the MSI site, if you actually go to the Taiwanese MSI site, you can go to the Optix MAG272CQR and download Gaming Intelligence from there. You have to kind of Google, and I'll put a link in the description below for those who actually need to get it. But once you install it from there, it is still in English, so no issues there. You can install it and then you will get the UI which you are looking for, which looks like that. Now, in Gaming Intelligence, with the click of a mouse, you're able to change the different profile presets in FPS, racing, real-time strategy, RPG, reader, cinema, and so on, as well as going into the different tools and being able to set up a different kind of, call it, nuanced features. Now, that is very important when I get to the results. Now, let's talk about the actual performance. Now, as promised, let's talk about the luminescence uniformity. Now, for those who don't know what luminescence uniformity is, it's basically the uniformity of how bright the screen is on the different segments, hence the name luminescence uniformity. You want the screen to be as bright at the top as at the bottom when you're testing. Now, we're only going to be looking at 100%, and as we can see, if we look at quadrant 1, we have 304.2, which is pretty close to the 300 nits that MSI promises. Now, where the worrying part comes in is if we look at the bottom left, there was a 30% difference to the main panel, which is panel 1 at 0, 0 being basically the top one, and 27% on the bottom right. That means that the bottom left panel, number 7, was 221 nits. That is a lot less bright than the top right, so we don't have very good luminescence uniformity, and we can see the differences all over the page there at 3, 19, 15 in the middle, 16 in the middle right. Now, it does achieve 100% of sRGB, which is a mental note that I asked you to make, because MSI actually says on DCI-P3 it achieves 90%. On my result, it actually achieved 92%. Overall, the monitor actually did pretty well with its performance. Gamut rating, it got a 5, tone response a 4.5, white point, it got a 3.5, contrast got a 5 out of 5, luminescence uniformity a 1.5, color uniformity 4.5, color accuracy 4, and overall rating 4. MPRT was exactly what MSI says, 1 millisecond, I got 1 millisecond, but where I did find something very obvious was obvious ghosting. There was obvious ghosting on all the different tests that I did. Now, this is not what you want in a gaming monitor, and I don't know if this has something to do with the luminescence uniformity, because basically how ghosting works is the ability for a little, call it switch or little node, to be able to turn on and off so that you don't see it. And if you don't know what ghosting is if you have your main image over here and that image is moving across, ghosting is kind of like a little shadow effect that happens behind that image. So when I was doing the ghosting test, I did see evident ghosting, which is something that you don't want on a gaming monitor. To expand on performance, whenever I've concluded all my results and I'm about to film, I do sometimes check what other reviewers had to say about this monitor, and I did find that quite a few reviewers gave it glowing reviews, really good reviews. Now, I found this contradictory to my findings, but what I did seem to find is that there were different model releases of this monitor throughout the years, or throughout the last 2-3 years, so that could have something to do with it. So in this conclusion, some of the tests were really good and actually better than what MSI had promised. Ghosting and tearing was evident and obvious, but what I did find was that when I went into Gaming Intelligence and applied settings, I played around with a lot of settings, that I was able to make this a little bit better. I wasn't able to negate it completely, but I'll put those settings in the description below so that if you want to apply the same settings that I had in order to have, call it, less ghosting, you are able to do that. Talking about Gaming Intelligence, I actually find it quite useful, and I find it quite a good feature, something that you can actually use, and I think it's got further application down the road. I just think that MSI has to work on the implementation through rolling out through different countries to make sure that the setup is a little bit easier. Gaming overall was an okay experience for me. It is a VA panel, which kind of puts color accuracy ahead of response, and that's where you're going to need to go for an IPS panel. But even for a VA panel, I do think that something needs to be done about the responsiveness and the ghosting. So in this conclusion, some of the tests were really good and actually better than what MSI had promised. But one thing I cannot get over is the luminescence uniformity. Generally, I test 3 times and I take a blend of those 3 tests, but this time I tested 6 times and the results were within margin of error. They were all pretty much accurate. So this is something that is a concern and something that I am going to chat to MSI about, maybe to see if it was a bad batch. With a price tag of about 10 or 11,000 Rand, depending on where you shop, it is a definite pass for me, but there are promising elements that have come out of this monitor for me, especially in gaming intelligence, something that I'd like to see MSI expand upon. But let's see what else they bring out in the future. Guys, hope you enjoyed this review. Again, look forward to seeing you on the next one. Cheers, goodbye.